Welcome to Cryptography Decrypted. In this chapter, we're going to look at encryption overview, symmetric encryption, asymmetric encryption, hashing, hybrid encryption, advanced encryption methods, as well as attack vectors. Encryption has actually been around throughout history. The Egyptians used the hieroglyphics, the Caesar used substitution ciphers, Spartans even used a skytele, or skytele, however you want to pronounce it, that was actually a thin sheet wrapped around a stick, effectively. And if we were to look at that, let me hold on. Here on Wikipedia, it actually shows a picture, and we can see that the rod has to be the correct diameter, otherwise the letters will not line up, and that would be very important for you to get the secret message. Of course, systems have become more complex, so we have evolved with this, and when we apply this to computers, we think of IPsec, PKI, public key infrastructure, quantum cryptography, pretty good privacy, elliptic curve, just a whole lot of different ones we see in modern computing. And because we want to keep our information safe, there's very much a need to encrypt a lot of our information. Encryption transforms information that may start out looking as if it were plain text, and then making it in an unreadable format, so those that do not have the decryption key or keys would not know how to read the information. They wouldn't be able to read the information. So the idea of encryption is it's considered to be a reversible process if you have the right key and algorithm. And the idea is you can encrypt the information and then decrypt it to reverse it, which is unlike the concept of hashing. With hashing, you think of it as being a one-way process. It's easy to break the glass window, but very difficult to put it back together. That would be more hashing. Now, we still complement encryption with integrity and authenticity. We start thinking of methods of message authentication code, as well as digital signatures, which can help make up for what just simple encryption and confidentiality would not accomplish. With cryptanalysis, we're looking at the science of studying and breaking encryption mechanisms. We have hackers that are doing this in an ethical way called white hat, and hackers that are doing this in a more evil way to get into information that they shouldn't be looking at to begin with, and that's considered a black hat. Then there's cryptology, and the idea of actually studying cryptography and cryptanalysis, where you're trying to break the encryption. Key clustering is where you have two different keys generating the same resulting ciphertext, which is the encrypted version from the exact same initial plain text, which would be obviously very unusual for that to happen. With the science of secret communication, we have cryptology, and first of all, we could look at breaking the encryption cryptanalysis. We could look at trying to disguise what we have, hide our information into a sort of a garbled format, cryptography. And steganography is actually generally included in chapters like these, but it's not really encryption. There is no encryption whatsoever with steganography. It's more of concealing. As we'll study this chapter, we're going to see there's symmetric and asymmetric encryption. With symmetric, it only uses one key for the encryption and the decryption. And we'll see transposition versus substitution ciphers, as well as a two-key system with public and private keys. And this is called asymmetric, where it uses Diffie-Hellman, elliptic curve, El-Gamal, and RSA. Now, looking at encryption algorithms, the idea is to take plain text and turn this into something that looks unreadable to most, and of course you would have to have the decryption key to actually make it meaningful and put it back into its original format. Now, with the encryption, if we look at symmetric is a one-key system. We have block and stream ciphers. The block ciphers are of some sort of fixed length. You'll hear words like 64-bit, 128-bit, 256-bit. And of course, some examples of that, we could see the original data encryption standard, which we would no longer use. The National Institute of Standards and Technology actually approved this initially, but as time has gone by, we found that that was not sufficient. And that's pretty typical with encryption. We may find that one particular encryption algorithm appears to be great, and then over time, with better computers, better technology, we find that it's no longer sufficient. So then we went 1980s, we're talking about triple DES. And then, of course, there were some others that have come along, RC2, RC5, and so on. And these would all be, again, block ciphers. And there's many more we'll look at with the concept of a block at a time, 64-bit, 128, and so on. The stream ciphers are still considered symmetric, but the idea is to encrypt one bit at a time. And a good example of a stream cipher would be RC4, which we see used in WEP encryption for wireless, and actually WPA as well. And the idea of the stream ciphers is they do execute at a faster speed, a higher speed than your block ciphers, and less complexity. Looking at symmetric, symmetric has its place. Within symmetric, we think of encryption and decryption, we think of confidentiality. We really don't think of anything beyond that. Anything beyond that would really be asymmetric. And with the symmetric, again, there is one key to do encryption, one to do decryption. And the idea is this key would need to be shared with whoever I want to decrypt what I send them. So if I encrypt a document and I want you to be able to decrypt that document, I must get that key to you. Now, symmetric is known for being quite fast because they're so simple. I think that's the magic behind it. There's not a whole lot of computation happening with this. It's not near as complicated, some of the asymmetric type algorithms. So with the simplicity of just simply maintaining confidentiality, this can be super fast. So symmetric encryption can be really wonderful for encrypting large amounts of information such as your hard drive. Now there are issues with this. How do we get the symmetric key shared with our friend that we wish to do the decryption with? We would have to look at how we're going to share this. We could use something like SneakerNet and actually get on our sneakers and walk over to them and bring it to them. But of course, you will find as we go through this chapter that when we get to asymmetric will solve the problem of this key being distributed, because we can actually use the asymmetric techniques to encrypt the symmetric key or the shared secret key, and then it can be distributed safely. Of course, WEP is word equivalent privacy. It's a very super limited these days wireless encryption that was based on a symmetric encryption called RC4. Now again, we may consider this to be a weakness, the fact that we have to find a way to get the key to its destination, but generally this is solved by using the asymmetric methods, which would encrypt the symmetric key or the shared key. If we strictly stayed in a symmetric world, we would end up with a large amount of keys. It would grow to a point where it was really unmanageable. Now we can use symmetric for many things, but it really, if a lot of people are involved in this, it could become quite cumbersome. Also remember that symmetric does not give you anything except confidentiality. No authenticity, no non-repudiation. We'll see that later. As far as some of the popular symmetric algorithms, we started out early on with DES, and you can see it's actually a 64-bit block size, a 56-bit key. And then there was a jump to triple DES. Triple DES is still actually using the same block size, but actually it's doing the operation 3 times, so it makes it more secure. With the advanced encryption standard, the block size can vary at least 128 bits and up. When you start looking at the key sizes, 128, 192, 256. So, and also when you look at the creators of AES, the 2 creators, if you put their names together, you get Rindell algorithm. So many places you'll just simply see Rindell and not AES. Some are of less popularity. We have International Data Encryption Algorithm, IDEA. You don't really hear that one. CAST 128, we don't really hear that one so much. RC5, we can see the numbers on that, 3264, 1280 to 2048. and of course the fish, blowfish and twofish. And of course, blowfish has gotten special attention, I think, because of the variable block size and the way that the key lengths are not fixed, anywhere from 1 to 448. So as you look at this, there's actually quite a few symmetric algorithms. DES was good at one time, again, data encryption standard. And it's not something you would really use these days because it does have a small key length, and it was replaced. I mean, it went through DES to triple DES to advanced encryption standard, and the key lengths are actually much higher. So at one time, DES seemed like a good idea, but of course, why not use something better, which would be more difficult to crack. Now, moving on to the asymmetric world. The asymmetric uses private and public keys, and you keep your private key private. Public key could potentially be published to a system where people can get to this, or it could be exchanged in some other way. But generally, the public key, I find, is made available to the users that need to get access to it. It would not be unusual for the individual users to publish their public key to some sort of system, maybe a global access list or something, some sort of system that would actually have that, and whenever you need to get the public key for someone else, you can do that. And depending on what they're trying to accomplish, you use one key to encrypt and the other key to decrypt. They are mathematically related, but you cannot derive one from the other. Always keep the private key private and secret, and the public key can be distributed. That's not a problem. And there are quite a few, or not quite a few, about 4 popular ones when it comes to the asymmetric world. And the asymmetric one you may have heard of is Diffie-Hellman. We have RSA. There's several here. Now, Diffie-Hellman is probably known for the key exchange. The RSA goes back to Ribes, Shamir, and Alderman, and it was based on factoring large prime numbers. So Ronald Ribes, Leonard Alderman, and Adi Shamir. So professors at MIT, and basically these have quite a history, as you can see. Now the asymmetric made up for some of the weaknesses with the symmetric. Now, well, one nice thing is with the asymmetric, you actually end up with less keys. If you worked out the symmetric, you end up with way more keys to manage than the asymmetric. Because the asymmetric, if you have 1,000 users, is 2,000. You just basically double it. So it's much more manageable. And with this, when it comes to dealing with the keys, we don't have to worry about how to distribute the keys because we have the concept of public and private. So with that, the public key is made available. It doesn't need the protection. The private key is kept private. So when they say out of band, we don't have to use something outside of the conventional network to distribute the information. If you're in band, you actually use your network to communicate. Out of band, you would have to find a method outside of that, maybe just manually taking the key to whoever needs your key. So asymmetric has it covered. Now, of course, asymmetric does give you some of the things we were missing in symmetric. You have the authenticity and the non-repudiation. Non-repudiation, we think of digital signatures. Now, there is really some bad sides to it, but it's not like we're going to get rid of it. The asymmetric is quite a bit slower than symmetric. So whenever you see asymmetric in action, it's actually going to be encrypting key information, not large amounts of information. You'll see symmetric maybe encrypting an entire hard drive, but you'll see asymmetric perhaps encrypting the symmetric key or the shared key, which would be symmetric. So it works out as long as you don't try to use asymmetric to encrypt a large amount of information. So it shouldn't really be a problem because we have symmetric. It's not like we're going to dispose of either method. They both have their place. The asymmetric being 1,000 times slower, we certainly wouldn't use it to encrypt a large amount of information. So it works out for what its purpose is. As far as some of the well-known ones, we do have the Diffie-Hellman, elliptic curve, Gamal, RSA, and knapsack. I would say if you were to ignore knapsack and just spell out the word deer, D-E-E-R, those would probably be the most popular ones. That's why I said it in that order. The Diffie-Hellman was really first, and then we see a lot of aspects pulled into the RSA, and elliptic curve has its place. Elgamal doesn't really take a lot of attention. We don't really hear much about Elgamal or knapsack for that matter. Now, when you think of asymmetric, you do generally think of key exchange, because that was actually the problem that the symmetric world had. How do we distribute the key? Because with the symmetric, we had a single key, a shared key, that needed to be used by the one doing the encrypting and the one who would receive the encrypted information and need to decrypt it, to reverse it. So as I told you, the asymmetric world, which we're in now, has several different algorithms that could take care of this. They actually could take care of the exchanging of that symmetric or so-called shared key. Diffie-Hellman was known for being a key exchange algorithm, and even if the two parties that were communicating had never had contact before, they could still take care of establishing a shared secret key over insecure communications. It really wasn't a problem. And so this key can then be used to encrypt communications using a symmetric key cipher. So the Diffie-Hellman took care of the key distribution problem. Elgamal was based upon the Diffie-Hellman. And again, the asymmetric methods are good for their purpose, to encrypt small amounts of information. And of course, the RSA is quite famous when you think about some of the RSA-based devices. If we wanted to look at an example of something based off of RSA, which is the asymmetric encryption, we can think of RSA Secure ID. It comes in many different forms. Okay, could be a device like this. It could look more like a credit card. Look at some of the different options here. It could actually be part of your software. But the idea of the RSA device, based on the RSA encryption, is the fact that it presents you with a number, and when you go to do your login, you're actually using that number on your screen. Now realize that that number, get a little better look at this, that number will change about every 60 seconds, so that can really be helpful to stop someone from shoulder surfing, writing down your number and thinking they've got something super special.